Hi everybody, Kerrie here at the North East Autism Society, and today I'm joined by Claire Stirland, who is going to be talking about sensory processing. So Claire, for people that don't know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Of course. Hello everyone. I am an occupational therapist and sensory integration therapist with Sensory Works, and what we're set up to do essentially is to help as many people as we can understand sensory processing issues better, to try and get the word out there as to how that can impact everybody's everyday life, the difficulties that it might make, but also to start to think about how we can overcome that in lots of different ways, through education, through just everyday life tweaks and some things that might be more obvious than we thought. So a big part of what we're set up to do is that, and then we provide a lot of services in the area to help people with developmental and sensory issues to start moving forwards, and in whatever way for them, whether it be understanding themselves a bit better or making some developmental changes. We help them in lots of different ways that way. But my main passion is helping people to understand sensory issues, because those issues impact me and my family quite a lot. And so I like to see that make a difference.
Great, Claire. So just as a starting point, many parents might be familiar with or heard the term sensory processing. So could you just explain, and I know it's quite a big topic, but in kind of as simple as possible, I suppose, what is sensory processing?
Okay, I like easy questions. So sensory processing is how we use the information from the world to understand our own bodies, but to understand how to use our own bodies in the world. And it makes it sound really grand, and it really isn't. So information from each of your senses will come in through whichever receptors, so whether it's your eyes, your ears, through your mouth, through your skin, and a few others besides. Then you use that information to understand that you have experienced some things in the world. And when you're growing and developing, your only window to what the world exists of is through your senses. And if your senses don't work very well, your understanding of the world will be different than most people's. So your reactions to the world will be different. And so most people have fairly similar sensory processing, so that if they experience a car going by, they will generally all just take a step back and feel fine and feel okay. But for people who have an issue with sensory processing and don't do it quite as well as other people, and there are a number of different reasons for that, then they will experience that car in a different way. Either that they don't register it going past, or that they might feel like they're about to die from the car, even though they're a good 3 foot away from the end of the pavement, and therefore it can feel quite threatening. And really, your senses are based on how you keep yourself safe and how you pay attention to the world. So as well as just giving you that window to the world, they help you to decide whether you need to be scared of something and run away or fight, or whether you need to pay attention to something. So if I switch a light on in a dark room, I suddenly get a bit of information in that wakes me up and brings me into consciousness. And for most people, when that happens, they won't feel scared by it. It won't cause them a problem. But for some people, it creates a reaction as if a lion's just appeared straight in front of them. And therefore, they feel incredibly threatened by that information. Now, that's a really simple version of it, because if you have a real significant sensory processing issue, that information can be coming at you left, right, and centre all of the time. And it can be really hard to work out what's making you feel very uncomfortable and scared, or that what's happening that means that you're zoned out of everything, so that you don't hear anyone when they're shouting at you. And that can be really complex. And that's why very often when people do have sensory processing issues, they're seen as behavioural long before we work out that they have a sensory issue. If children go through development with a sensory issue, it means that their ability to be able to come out the other side of development and function the same as everybody else can be different than most people's. So sometimes people who have sensory processing issues will end up with mobility issues, balance coordination issues, not understanding their own body very well, but also not being able to react to the world as quickly. So it can take them a bit longer to process that information and to be able to respond appropriately. So in a kind of long-winded version, that's the short answer. Does that help?
That does help sensory processing. So, Claire, what are the main differences in sensory processing you see in autistic children specifically? Because I know a lot of our parents might be familiar with terms like hyper or hyposensitive or sensory defensive. What are the main things that you see in your practice?
Okay, so when we talk about sensory, everybody in the sensory world really likes to make it sound very grand. So there's lots of nice words around sensory, and we all use slightly different ones. So everyone's a little bit confused as to what it all means. And so I use some really simple terms, as much as I possibly can, to explain that you will have your 7 senses, for which 5 of those we all learn about in school: our sight, sound, smell, taste and touch. And the other 2 are to do with our body awareness, the use of our muscles and understanding where we are in space without having to look. So that's the proprioceptive system, which a lot of people have heard about when we talk about things like deep pressure, heavy work, that kind of thing. When we talk about weighted blankets, bug vests, we're talking about proprioception. And then there's the other sensation, which is the vestibular system, which sits in your inner ear, and it deals in movement, heights and gravity. For all of those senses, we're constantly picking up information from the world about our body in relation to those senses. And for some people, they will be very sensitive to that information. Now, you can be sensitive to one sensation and not to the others. And just to make it really complicated, that can swap around all of the time. So if somebody reacts one day but doesn't the next to something, it doesn't mean to say that it isn't a sensory issue. It just means that something's changed from day to day. That means that they can cope better on one day than they can on another. And so we have the oversensitive responses. So that's, for example, if you take me near the edge of a cliff, I'll back away pretty quickly because I'm very sensitive to height and gravity information. And we will get that a lot with people. Some people can't lay themselves backwards without feeling like they're falling very far. And some people don't like to walk down uneven surfaces. So if you've got a cobbled street, grass or sand, some people don't like to walk on those because they're different in surfaces. And you'll see them want to hang on to other people, and you'll just see them get a little bit more rigid in the body, and you can see that anxiety there, but you don't always know why. So that's sensitivity. On the other side of that, you will get people who are undersensitive to those sensations. And when I say undersensitive, what I mean is it takes a whole lot more of that sensation before they even register it. So I like to think of it a bit like a mileometer on a car. So I might detect noise at 5 miles an hour. Some people need it to be at 100 miles an hour before they even know it's there. And that's a little bit like me and my husband. I will hear the music on nice and quietly and think, oh, that's a bit loud. And he has it full blast, doesn't even know it's going, and my head is hurting. And that's the difference in that sensitivity. And so some people, if they need a lot more of that sensation before they register it, they will spend a lot of their life seeking that information. So if I don't register movement very well, I need to move a lot more before I just feel okay and awake. So if I'm somebody who kind of climbs the rafters, jumps off high heights, constantly moving, that may be because I don't get enough movement in to feel alert and okay. And the difficulty is, if I don't reach the right level of alertness from my senses, then I can't function very well. So I become very antsy and very uncomfortable, and I can't concentrate on anything else until I balance that out. And that's the same for all of us, whether we have a sensory processing issue or not. And to be fair, the issues that I see in autistic people that I work with and live with are as varied as I see in anybody else with developmental issues, because it's the sensory processing that forms the building blocks for every other part of development. And very often those building blocks, the foundations of that sensory development, aren't sitting as straight as they should be for most people. And so very often what we'll see is inconsistency in the way somebody responds. And very often we'll see things that are called challenging behaviour, difficult behaviour, violent, aggressive responses from somebody that may not be intending to be violent or aggressive. And the reason that that is that their physical makeup, the way their body works, is making them respond in a particular way before they have the ability to be able to manage that from a kind of cognitive and social point of view. So that means that they've acted before they've been able to think that through to the consequence, but their body's made them do that, so they don't have time to process it. Now, if you have a social communication issue, it's highly likely that your skill sets for being able to manage more complex social issues and managing yourself socially will be harder for you than it will be for the average person, and therefore being able to deal with that physical response and understand where that might take you and the problems it might cause you. So for example, if somebody comes up to me and touches me and I am oversensitive to touch and it makes me want to really make them go away, and I end up pushing that person away and they hurt themselves because my body's made me feel like I'm under threat, like they're the lion in the room, that means that I haven't been able to think that through, that actually that person hurting themselves will then be my fault, and what will I do with that afterwards? And that's usually the biggest set of issues that I see, but it comes in a huge range of things that are harder to detect and those things that are very obvious for some people. Alongside that, because of the mechanism of sensory processing, it very much manifests, it creates a sense of anxiety, and somebody who may present with a very anxious personality who's struggling very much with lots of life because their sensory processing isn't working well. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have classic anxiety that would come from a psychological perspective. And those together are the biggest issues that I see in sensory processing.
Well, Claire, thank you. I think we could probably talk all day about all of this, but that has been really useful. I'm sure our parents will find that really useful as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.